Again, I think you know me already. I'm Dazza Greenwood, for those of you that are new here. And this panel is on automated legal entities and autonomous legal entities. We're going to be digging deeper now into one of the international principles that Silke brought up. DAOs should have legal personality. That's another way of saying it should be like a corporation. Can sue and be sued, form contracts, hire people. So let's dig into that. Won't you join me on the couch area? Right here's fine. I want to get us started, and then one of you go. So this will be mostly a discussion with people, we hope, but just to set the table a little bit. The question here is, how can software, like how can a DAO, for example, or other automated software, constitute a valid legal entity? So one of the principles was that it could be liable. In order to be, for anyone or anything to be liable, it has to be a legal entity. So like a poem can't be liable, or an idea can't be liable. Like a script I just wrote in JavaScript can't be liable, even if it does something to incur incurs liability. There's legal parties are required to be named in a lawsuit, and in order to be sued. So here's some of the questions that this has raised. If humans are in the loop for key approvals, decisions, or other actions, what aspects of the entity could or should be achieved through automated processes? So what's the relationship between humans and the software code? We have a concept that Silke just brought up of like a participant that has an address. Are there other roles that one could imagine? Another way to say that would be, if you looked at all of the functions and actions that a legal entity must take at minimum, must be capable of taking, like it has to be capable of signing something, it has to be capable of having process served on it, like a legal notice. Which of these functions right now can be or should be achieved by software, and which ones can or should be achieved through humans that are acting as agents for the software? Or the other way, and then I guess I'll say this, there's kind of three ways people have talked about this. One of them is that the software is sort of an AI, and it can contract with humans to act as its agents. The other way to look at it is you have humans that are like the board of directors, and they're operating through the software. So the company or the firm is software. And another way to look at it, which is going to be represented on our panel, is that the software itself should be a legal entity. That's a little bit edgy, but it's not unprecedented in the law. So for example, in maritime law, for various purposes, a ship has been considered a legal entity. If you look back in maritime law, that's not unprecedented. Obviously, corporations are considered legal entities. They're legal persons. And the other thing I was going to say is one of the outputs of this panel and of our brainstorming together is a continuing conversation with the National Association of Secretaries of State. That's a U.S. Organization where all of the elected members, where all of the members are elected secretaries of state. And in the United States, they're the statewide elected office that's usually responsible, almost exclusively responsible for forming corporations or LLCs. They're very interested in blockchain, and states like Wyoming and Delaware and others are doing some things with blockchain. But one of the questions that I'm talking with them about, and which may be on one of their future agendas for more discussion, and I've agreed to give Leslie Reynolds, who's their executive director, the notes and a link to this discussion as well, is what about the corporations division? Could there be a way where software could form a corporation? There's a certain amount of data that's needed. You have to fill, usually a human on a web form, fill out the name of the corporation, the name and address of a person to serve process, a registered agent, who's on the board, some things about the scope, if there's stock, what classes of stock are involved. You submit like $35 to more, in a credit card and hit submit, and you get back, if all the fields are correct, a corporation with a number, and it exists in a registry that the Secretary of State maintains, like a directory of all the then current corporations. I think this is where we want to focus, at least part of the dialogue here is, as a real practical matter, can we hack some software? Can we build and rapid prototype some software in collaboration with friends at the National Association of Secretaries of State, at least the ones that raise their hand and say we want to play, we want to explore this, that would work hand in glove with their current web services that they use as an interface for people to form corporations and LLCs. We think we can, and we think by rapid prototyping something like that as a result of the dialogue today, we'll learn a lot more about whether we can do this now or whether there's a gap or some little wrinkle that we hadn't discovered yet, and that can feed back into be more requirements or design goals that we could then do a second version of the software to try to address. So with all of that as a kind of context setting, I want to introduce first Brenden Maher, who's an MIT Media Lab alumni, and we also went to college together back in 1850 years.
Centuries ago.
Yeah, and Brenden, why don't you introduce yourself and then make the case for software actually being a legal entity.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dazza. Thanks. If I had the first words of my talk, I'd be all set.
Hold it up to your mouth.
There we go. Okay. So the first thing I want to say is that if you're following along...
A little closer.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. Wait, let me get the first word. I'll be much better. There we go. So this is going to be an action-packed talk. And if you're following the slides, I want you to know that later, anything I don't cover, we can cover later on the panel, or you can talk to me later on. So my name is Brenden Maher. I am an MIT Media Laboratory alumnus from 1998, and I have a lot of experience in these types of systems. Satoshi granted us proof of experience, and most importantly, proof of existence. He showed us that he is, let me say this again. Boy, did I botch that up.
Thanks.
So this is the story. So Satoshi granted us proof of existence, but he did not grant us proof of identity. Now this is a problem for automated and autonomous systems, because you can't sue Satoshi, okay? There is a bigger problem with automated and autonomous systems because they are something that can kill you, right? So what I propose is paying attention to jurisdiction. We want to have these things that are autonomous, have a jurisdiction, have them be registered. So my big proposal is that we have a consensus of risk, a consensus of safety risks, so that we take all of the things that are related to safety around these things, and we have consensus around them. Not just safety, but also their viability, right? Because we're talking about distributed and autonomous entities which have a life, right? So it could be viability in terms of their long-term livability. This relates to operational capital, right? You don't want these things to get stuck on a bridge because they don't have any money, right? So everything in that realm. There is another aspect to this, which is emergent dynamic law and emergent dynamic systems. Emergent dynamic systems and environments are problematic for automated and distributed systems, because we're working with contracts. We all know about them, the smart contracts. These contracts are deterministic. They are Turing complete contracts. They have loops that are finite. But what happens when you take an emergent environment and you have random things that can happen, right? They can make those contracts become non-deterministic, and this is a problem. If it rains, do this. If it snows, do that. But if there's a hurricane and you didn't plan for that, there's a problem. If this is an autonomous or automated system that's a real-time system, then you can kill somebody, right? So these things are really important. So what you want to be able to bear mind to and you want to be able to do is to have a cryptographic representation or representations of these things. You want to have a reasoning about the safety of these things and their viability. You want to know that they have safety systems in place. However, you can't guarantee for sure mathematically that they are going to be safe, right? Because nobody could do that. But you want to know at least there's a system. So how do you do this? You have cryptographic representations such as multi-sig signatures that do proof of authority. You have hashing. You could do hashing of algorithms, hashing of data sets. This is not just related to autonomous entities, but it's also related to DAOs and governments and artificial intelligence. You can have zero-knowledge proofs. There's all sorts of different kinds of algorithms that we have now, that we will have in the future, that allow for this to happen in a deterministic way for non-deterministic events. You're all lawyers, and what I want to just remind and share is that this is not Excel. It's not Excel at all. This is the hardest part of computing. It's real-time systems. Lawyers tend to think in terms of clauses that are about the future and clauses about the past. But it's the stuff in the middle, the really hard stuff. Okay? Now, the good thing is that there's a lot of geeks out there that actually know how to do this really well. Okay? It's actually a relatively small subset. But they're the ones who are doing the autonomous cars and the rockets that can self-dock without human intervention. Okay? So there are people who know how to do this. Don't tread on the First and Fourth Amendment. It's really important. Keep your smart contracts simple. Make them so that they're relative to safety and also to viability. Don't get caught up in what will be a potential problem about infringement on First and Fourth Amendment, because this is going to play out over this next year and coming years. We're all in the same cubicle together, and quite frankly, computational law is exciting. And all the lawyers are now geeks. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brenden. Awesome. Great. So let's hold questions until Silke has said her piece, and then what we really want to do is circle up and have a conversation. So, Silke?
There are actually a few countries, or there's at least one country where I've seen that has given legal personality to smart contract systems, or what they call innovative technological arrangement. That's Malta. I don't think they've done it that well, but they've actually made an attempt at this last year. I'm not happy with the regulation, but I'd be happy to see other states to actually work on this. So the issue is why I'm not happy about what they've done is, so they've actually in their legislation they passed 3 acts, one of them is relevant to this, set out that decentralized autonomous organization or smart contracts are subject to this, so can be kind of be added to some register, and although it's not set out in the act itself saying this DAO or smart contracts going to have legal personality. That's what's basically it does. The thing is, how does it do it? It's using the old methods of what we already know, like the kind of traditional ways to go through intermediaries. So instead of having this in like a lean new regulation where you have like a self-owning smart contract or smart contract system or DAO, you have all these other parties that are involved in this. So you have someone is the applicant, who could be the designer or some other legal entity that needs to submit the application to be like certified, to have this ITA, innovative technological arrangement, certified. Then you need some resident agent who looks after this. You need a technical administrator, and all these people basically are intermediaries that make that system very expensive. In addition, this technical administrator who has to be appointed has to have a backdoor to like a kill switch, an amendment key to the innovative technological arrangement, and that's basically most of the things that are built in the space right now, not really a good idea. So having spoken to the regulator, they have these guidance notes, and in those guidance notes they said, yeah, we just realized, okay, that seems to be a problem. A lot of the systems don't want to have this kill switch where the regulator comes in and changes all the things. So, well, maybe for some things you don't need it, so if the consumer protection doesn't require it, then maybe we'll consider not to have it. In addition, every time you make a change, so for example, we have given the auctioneering power of the Dutch exchange to this DX DAO. We're in the process of doing that. I mean, the point of doing that is that the auctioneer can change things. So if we were in Malta, we would need the regulator for every single code change you make to the system, would need to have an approval for it, which is a cumbersome project. So because of this, I think the Malta framework is being used. It is being used, but not as much as it could. It's super expensive. And I don't know that many projects that actually considered for this, for like a smart contract or DAO to be based there. But it's a good start, and I mean, they made an attempt to give legal personality to code, basically. So, yeah, there are other options. I don't think I should add.
What are the other options?
So they are also.
I think on the topic of Malta, I don't know all the details, but yeah. So I'm Danny from DAO Incubator in Pando. But after this technological arrangement law came out, there was the Max Ganado, who was one of the person who wrote this. He wrote the Ganado Doctrine, and so I don't know the details, but they are unveiling a fourth DAO law that will give also DAOs like a legal personality that is distinct from the idea of the technological arrangement, because it assumed agency on a person and not agency of the DAO on its own.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, I don't know what they're going to unveil. It's going to be in less than a month, but I know they are evolving on this framework.
So they're going to publish it within the next month, you say?
Yes. So it's going to be the Malta Blockchain Summit, and they're on the website of the event.
Yeah.
They said they're going to unveil it, the Prime Minister, whatever, during that. So, yeah.
There's a link to that paper on the. There's a link to that paper on the paper that I have associated with this.
Perfect. So if you go back to the event site, I'll add all of those links. All the materials are in our GitHub repository where the event site is, but look there for the links and also come up afterwards and ask for more information. What is going on here? I had to ask for feedback, but not this. That was awesome. Woo! Who wants to party tonight? Okay. So let's open it up now. Questions, comments. You first.
Thanks.
You want to meet me halfway? Okay, thanks.
So just as a bit of a background, I'm a corporate attorney who specializes in formation of new companies. And I tend to think that the ability to create a separate legal personality, at least in the U.S., is leavened by certain ways that the corporate veil can be pierced if the entity is used for evil. So if the entity is fundamentally undercapitalized or is used for some other bad purpose. And to me, that's sort of the natural trade-off. We allow people to create separate legal entities and limit their own personal liability in exchange for certain measures to actually grab at them if they misuse this particular legal structure. And I think that's fair. So, what mechanisms would you suggest to have fail-safes for situations where people use these legal personhoods for evil?
I can get us started on that. That's an excellent question. Do you mind holding on to that and handing it to the next person? Thanks. You're all deputized. So what was rattling around the back of my head when Silke gave the lunch talk and shared with us the international principles, including for legal personality for DAOs, the principle that a DAO should be liable for its own actions, got me thinking about what types of almost public policy trade-offs would be appropriate, and where would this liability allocation make sense in a more holistic legal framework. And what it called to mind was in the 90s when public key infrastructure was coming on strong with the advent of wide use of public key certificates and certification authorities. I was active in the American Bar Association Information Security Committee, and we'd worked with the state of Utah and some other states to draft digital signature legislation that included liability limitations for certain parties, like the certification authority, for example, so long as it abided by its published rules for identifying a party and associating a public key with them. Well, it turned out we were too rash in creating legislation. It was too early, and we didn't fully understand how that market was going to develop, or what all the relationships and risks are and how they could more fairly be allocated. One of the criticisms of that is what called to mind by a guy named Brad Biddle was, well, if you're going to limit the liability of a party or cause a party to be liable for something, there maybe also should be a concept of like a capital reserve. So for example, if one says as a principle, a DAO or other automated entity would be liable for certain types of actions, like let's just postulate for a moment that we provided them legal entity status. Maybe one of the types of circuit breakers could be, and it must have proportional insurance, bonding, risk reserve pool that's kind of commensurate or proportional to the risks that it is taking. That way people could have recourse and could be made whole again. So thinking about some of those types of mechanisms to ensure the fairness of a coherent and complete legal framework, I think is that's the work before us now. More or other comments on that?
Okay, great. Yeah, sure, I've got a few comments. One is that for certain things, you do want to have a registration and a kill switch. And this comes up, it's not just blockchain or finance, it's also in other areas, in other domains, biology, right? These are the same issues that we are facing in genetics. Kevin Elsflat is doing work with that, with idea and construct around gene drives, right? Having kill switches for biological entities. So these are the themes of the day.
And you're speaking to the like synth bio
Yes,
and like
that's correct,
manufactured biologic entities, not the result of natural evolution.
Correct, yes.
Great. Other comments on this?
No, I mean, I wanted also to speak about the reserve structure. So basically, I mean, what you would have to have is for the DAOs, the moment you do this, the legislation would have to consider how to protect the consumers, and one way of doing that basically through for the entity to have sufficient assets proportionate to what they're doing. But it would be, I think we need to stop stop looking only at like the approach we've taken for years, which is going through intermediaries, and like the system has changed. It's just a different technology. It needs different solutions, and you cannot just do the same thing we've done before. So I think there should be self-owning contracts, smart contracts, or DAOs that have personality.
Great. Other questions or ideas? Yes.
I wanted to ask a clarification on the notion of the safety spell switch. So I feel like the argument you're making about like complex behavior coming from like basic atomic units, you could not only look at in smart contracts, but like in normal contracts. So like the basic atomic unit of the society is the law that then kind of creates this thing called society, which is chaotic and emergent. And we see this also applied, for example, this complex system design in the social management and social credit system in China. And I understand what you mean by having it being autonomous. It means it's like immutable and unstoppable and nobody can restrict it. So my question is that, are you advocating for a limitation of autonomy via this safety mechanisms?
Mr. Song, yes. That is an excellent question. And it really depends on what the use of these are. We don't want to get into a situation where we're micromanaging all the code, right? Because then we're treading on our free speech and the Fourth Amendment, right? Search and seizure. So there has to be a balance, okay? It's clear to me, and I wasn't a person who initially thought, oh, we should, have registration for things. I was actually against that. But then I started realizing that, once for certain things people start to die, somebody's going to say we need to register something. So we better start to think about this. But it's very important that we just don't blindly start saying that everything needs to be registered. Because the fact is that blockchains and all these technologies are software. And, that could be a problem for free speech.
Hey, Ori, I'm about to call on you just so you start coming this direction, but I think you're the next question.
Just to expand on this conversation, a corporation sometimes needs to be dissolved or needs to be shut down or wound down. Is there something built in? Because thinking of the kill switch as something, like something terrible is happening is one way, but there may be another where you may want to just decide as a group that you need to cease the functioning of the organization. So how do you do that?
Well, that's governance, right? No one said that these things don't have governance. The question is, for the governance they have, at what point is it registered? At what point is it centralized to a jurisdiction, right? And there's going to be lots of different forms of these things. I can make a club, and that club could be a decentralized organization. Am I going to have to register my club for the SEC or any other body? It really depends on what these things do.
Here. It reminds me, the first time I ever saw MIT Media Lab, Brenden and I we had clubs. You had the virtual reality club, and I had the legal interest group of Boston Computer Society. We teamed up to do a joint meeting, and we talked about VR and avatars and AI and law. And one of the ideas that came out of that session, when we were actually talking about this topic, like should they have legal personality? Should can these things actually be like legal entities? Was I think I had said, well, what if we had like a license plate equivalent on them? So right. We know what license plates are. We kind of know the role that they serve to connect an object now that can itself be autonomous, right. With autonomous vehicles, to a legal party, and there's a registry somewhere. You could do a lookup, but we don't regulate where exactly you can drive. But we have some proportional touch point to have a directory and to attribute the acts of hardware or software in this case to legal parties and to legal mechanisms like risk reserve pools or car insurance or whatever. Steve, just kidding.
Thanks, Greg Shatton. And I'm asking this with neither hat on that I had before, but as a participant in ICANN, Internet governance, and especially dealing lately with the issues of the WHOIS domain registration database
Yeah.
and the effect that GDPR has had on it. And so I think by analogy, the domain name registration database, which is a privately governed set of data that's collected each time somebody registers for a domain name, and which until May 25th of last year was basically open data.
Yeah.
And then on May 25th suddenly became redacted for privacy on almost a global basis.
Right.
So
but still available upon,
96% have not even been responded to. The information is now privately in the hands of each individual registrar or registry, and most of them respond poorly, if at all, to most requests for information. And it's not at all automated. There's discussion now of an automated and accredited access model. That'll take about a year and a half, maybe, to resolve. But I think there's a lot could be learned, both good and bad, lessons learned from the conversation that's being had, the dialogue that's being had at ICANN around how you deal with the data governance of personal data that has been collected, in this case, over 20 years. But the challenge, the GDPR challenge is huge, and depending upon the stakeholders you listen to, global privacy is not only the most important thing, it's the only important thing, and WHOIS is a terrible idea, and nobody should have any access to it ever. Other people feel differently, but as soon as you start getting a lot of different stakeholders in the conversation, and remember the bottom line idea of GDPR is that the data belongs to the subject.
Right.
So you have a lot of issues here about how you actually can maintain databases of information on a private level, because GDPR does allow governments to collect all kinds of information that private organizations can't. So so that creates an issue for ICANN that say the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles does not have.
Got it.
So
just a quick check. I know you have a question. Who else is busting with a question?
I guess my question is, have you thought about kind of
Okay.
the issues that come out of this and the kind of the interaction between GDPR and other privacy rules and collecting this data in a way that would be made available, and by whom and to whom and when?
I can speak a little bit to that, although I'd like to hear from others. Your question, and then I've asked Ori to come up to talk to us about a state statute in Vermont where they're already moving toward blockchain-based LLCs, and he's building a system that I think would be a good starting point as we get into our breakout groups. But some musings on what you just said, Greg, are number one. There is so I was an arbitrator for many years in the UDRP, which is the domain name versus trademark dispute resolution process. So that would be an example that continues today, where if you're a accredited registrar, incapable of assigning domain names, one of the things you have to do is respond to this kind of very structured complaint process. If a registered trademark holder believes someone that's a registered domain holder is infringing their trademark, there's a form you fill out, and it starts this process. So that's not the same as a public registry where you can see the name and the telephone number and address of everybody, but it does respond to due process, and it responds to to a need to know. Same thing with license plates, actually. If you get someone's license plate and the insurer needs to find out who's responsible, for example, there's a process to do that without rendering naked everybody that's in the registry. But as you said, I think the most important thing is actually the other one I'd name is lawyers. And so I once I had a law license, for other public policy reasons that balance with privacy, it's felt that my name and my address and my current status of active practice, have I had any malpractice against me, those types of consumer protection notices, I have had no malpractice, were publicly available in a lookup. So I think there's several gradations, but what you're saying is very much essential to, I think, Brendan's main point, which is we have to have some way to register these artificial entities, and there has to be, and I think that should be a core component of our thinking going forward. That should be one of the design challenges that we try to solve for, and part of the way to solve for it is to address the wrinkles that you're bringing up.
The data governance up front really needs to be data governance by design that's built in, and not just privacy by design, but also access by design.
Amen. So I think you're next. Can you grab a mic from anybody? And who are you?
Hi, I'm Diana Stern. I work at Baker Hostetler. So I'll start with my questions. You can think about it, and then I'll give a little bit of context. So my question is, what do you think is a minimum viable DAO? So both from like a legal perspective and a technical perspective. And from a legal perspective, I'm thinking of it like when you think of the downside of liability, and we can limit it to the US, if you're not proactive in setting up a structure and setting up contractual agreements, then you fall into that unincorporated partnership situation with nobody liked, because eventually if you can't collect from the DAO itself, you're gonna go to the people running the nodes or whatever. And then from a technical perspective, what's the minimum viable DAO? Like, do you start on a permission network, or like a permission network that other people can see so you have some accountability, like a public permissioned, or you just go like full Ethereum, or do you start on the test network of a public Ethereum? So I just would like to get some thoughts on kind of what is the minimum viable DAO from those perspectives.
So from a legal perspective, minimum viable DAO would probably be, I mean, just to understand your question fully, it's basically, you want to see how you can build a DAO which is legally compliant.
So that you avoid those worst case scenarios happening.
Yeah.
Like, what is the bare minimum we kind of need so that we're not worried about being sued as individuals for what the DAO does?
So the easiest way to do it, and it very much depends on the purpose of your DAO, and I think Beth is going to do a really nice workshop upstairs about this later. So you would want to have an anchor in a jurisdiction, because as I said, if you do not have an anchor, you can be sued anywhere on the planet, basically in any country, because they, via private international law, they basically draw you into your jurisdiction. So to make it the easiest, you would go probably for, you could, for example, as I earlier said, you go for company limited by guarantee in the UK. I think you have something similar here in the US, where there aren't any members. It's used usually for charities or cooperatives. You would then have the company register of this isn't public. You could put that on a blockchain. You just, the downside of that is, and I found this out only 2 days ago, is that you basically have to have a board. And of course the board can have liability. So what you want to do in that situation is have a D&O insurance. So I think this would probably be the minimum viable DAO, where you need an anchor through either a company or something. There will be some directors or board of directors or similar guarantors or whatever you use, and they would need an insurance. I think this would be the base. There's also another thing in the US which is really interesting if you want to do one here, is that through some bad legal drafting, you can actually create a zero-member LLC. So what happens is that the moment, it's possible that so they allow, and I'm really not an expert on US law, but they allow 90 days for you to have not a member in your LLC, but there's nothing after those 90 days to kind of struck it out. So you can just go on, you have a perpetual zero-member LLC, and that would be perfect for a DAO, I think. I mean, because the LLC owns itself because there's no member. I would assume they'd probably get rid of this sometime.
Well, and speaking of LLCs and blockchain, and what would be like minimum, maybe requirements and constraints that you'd want to build in at design phase. Ori's been working diligently on this, and you're as far along as anyone I've met before.
And I can answer quickly from the technical perspective. I think the minimum viable DAO is just a multi-sig. And so we already see thousands of these. And if you have a 3 of 5 multi-sig, it's a DAO. It's an on-chain decision process for budgeting funds and making decisions. So executing any arbitrary transaction on the Ethereum blockchain, for example. Even on Bitcoin, you can do, it supports multi-sig, so you can have a DAO on Bitcoin. And so you already see these like more complex protocols being built on Bitcoin just on the basis of convoluted ways of ordering multi-sig transactions. And then that kind of transitions into the project I'm working on, which right now we are just a multi-sig, and so we are operating as a DAO, but we realized really quickly that there's legal liability issues, like you're saying. We're all have like unlimited joint and several liability for all of the DAO's actions and its deaths. So the route we've been going is working with a firm in Vermont to stand ourselves up as a BBLLC, and then also transition to a more complex on-chain mechanism. So instead of just a multi-sig, having a DAO stack DAO be the back end.
Can you unpack BBLLC? Like what's
Yeah,
going on in Vermont?
Yeah, sure. So I think it was in July, they passed a law that is called, part of it is the blockchain-based LLC. And the idea is that you could kind of, like Silke was saying, like just anchor your DAO or smart contract into the legal system. So what it would look like in practice is you'd have an operating agreement that just specifies a smart contract as the mechanism for distributing and changing ownership and governance. And so you just have a really, really lightweight contract on the legal side that kind of specifies who the administrative participant is, the person who's going to be served notices, who's going to pay taxes, who's going to have a mailing address on the books. And then that person doesn't necessarily need to have any claims on equity or special privileges that the potentially thousands of other members of the DAO don't have. So yeah, you can have an operating, and we're going through the steps right now, and so we're really right in the middle of it. So I don't really know completely how it's going to look, but we're designing it like very intentionally so that there's no like centralization vector, so that the linkage that the smart contract system has with the legal system isn't a vulnerability that compromises the autonomy, as Danny was talking about, of the DAO. So that a kill switch wouldn't be necessary. You would just have all operation, governance, ownership, decisions delegated on chain.
Can I?
I just want to clarify one thing and then right back to you. So part of what Ori's talking about, and we have a version of it here that's marked up, and I think probably one of our breakout groups will be focused on this project that Ori's talking about. But you literally can go to the Secretary of State's office in Vermont now, and one of the types of LLCs you could select based on this recently enacted statute is the blockchain-based LLC. And among other, so there's one part of the workflow that I just want to highlight, which is these steps with the Secretary of State. You pay your fee to create and form the LLC, and you have some minimum terms in there, and we're just kind of going through the statute like over the last couple of days to see what those are. But there's the blockchain address where you could find the smart contract with the operating rules that are incorporated by reference.
The way that you change what contract you're pointing to. So maybe the contract itself could have mechanisms for swapping out which contract is the governance, or you could define in the legal process how you would switch from this multi-sig to a DAO stack DAO to an Aragon DAO.
Yeah, so I just want to highlight that. Follow-up.
Yeah, so I'm curious, is the government doing anything to interface better with the technical aspects of what you're building? Like, messaging in different kinds of ways instead of like attaching documents to emails? Are they doing anything that's progressive on that front?
Yeah, not that I know of. The most useful thing they could do would be to have an Ethereum address for paying taxes, because then we can build a module to automate our taxation, so we can be tracking kind of our income and using the tax rates to automate the paying of taxes. Right now, you would need that administrative participant to then have the DAO vote to give the administrative participant the amount of taxes that the entity is due. And that's like a point of potential contention, that the DAO could decide not to pay its taxes, I guess. And so one thing you could do to prevent this, you talk about kind of designing systems so that they don't run into these problems, is that you could create like a module on the DAO or an additional like function or contract that is setting aside these taxes that then go to the administrative participant that they can then pay the state with.
Good stuff. Silke.
Yeah, I want to say something else to the minimum viable DAO. What you would also want to do is that the members, you need to set up, or you should set up in a contractual agreement for in that participation agreement he just mentioned, you would also want to have a dispute resolution mechanism for the members inside, because that's easy to regulate. You would want to have it to be a closed off system so that you don't. We have enough problems with third parties, so try to make it so that you don't have any problems with the other members. For example, you'd build in waivers, indemnifications, and like an arbitration system, which can even be on-chain, because there are now some on-chain system. So I would try to also include a dispute feature.
An internal dispute.
An internal one. So that you have to kind of have only a minimum anchor to the state through like arbitration, where you can check, you can choose your rules of applicable law. You can often not do that in state law, and have an on-chain arbitration system that is enforceable in the real world, but basically make it closed off.
Yeah, and there's protocols out there like Claros that do peer-to-peer, which is probably what you're referring to, peer-to-peer arbitration. So one option is to have a function in your contract that, if someone claims that decision the DAO made was against its agreement with the DAO, that it could delegate to this arbitration network. Or if your DAO is well enough configured, it can all the arbitration can be internal to the DAO. Like you could say, if there's a dispute with the small decision making that happens, you take it to a majority or supermajority vote to the DAO to resolve the dispute. And that way you just, like you're saying, minimize the interfacing that has to happen with the legal system.
There's also Reality.to and Claros, and I forgot.
Aragon Court.
Arrogant, yes, that one is also very good.
And Dash does a lot of stuff.
Like a digital jurisdiction for all of the DAOs. And so from all of these DAOs, they randomly draw jurors, and you can basically upload a proposal agreement, which is like, these are the agreements we go with. And so you can basically contest exactly, it's kind of based on Claros, but the difference with Claros, that Claros is basically general. You can point it to any smart contract or escrowing, and this is for digital jurisdiction of DAO of DAOs. So.
DAO of DAOs. So we're just about to wrap up, but why don't we make this the last question? Can you grab the mic?
It's not a question. I made a
statement.
LLC on the legal end, so I can tell you how to do it.
Can you say it into the mic?
Yeah, so I made a BBLLC on the legal end, so I can briefly explain how that works.
But can I ask, so the next thing we're going to do is break into smaller groups. So let's have a group, or maybe we can hijack slightly your group that you're doing with the DAP agreement. But I know some of us want to continue the discussion about DAOs and legal entities, but time doesn't completely permit. So can we put that forward to the breakouts? And let me ask, is there any final things that people on the panel would like to say? Brenden.
Sure. This is related to human in the loop. So there are times when a human in the loop becomes necessary. Oddly enough, in my discussions with Beth, it turned out that thinking about these not from the life or birth of a company, but from the death is kind of useful, right? Looking at it in terms of bankruptcy and what happens when you reverse the process. So I'll leave you with that.
Right. Here for life cycle analysis. Okay, so let's, how about a round of applause for all the panelists? Nice. We're making progress. Okay, so now finally we all get to talk at once with these breakout sessions. Is there a wireless mic I can use? Where's a wireless mic? Okay, so what's going to happen now? Just as a reminder, let's just get a brief show of hands so we can get the right number of chairs and everything. So who here would be interested in the data as property